Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about our long-term work, heavy metal exposure studies on the Cheyenne River tribal land. I also wanted to introduce myself. I'm Esther Erdi from the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. I also put a picture of my family. I was born and raised in Hungary, and a picture of my parents. My daughter is studying in Scotland in the UK, and unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of my son, but he works here at the University of New Mexico himself too. I put some of beautiful pictures of Albuquerque. I also, I'm a very sport person, and I played 4 years of right forward basketball team in my high school, and I also have this quote that's like it's really important for me. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I always take opportunities. I work very hard and apply for continuously for many grants. So we are able to support community interest and research on the reservation. So our work started actually in with the Cheyenne River 1986. And I know some of us weren't even born that time or being very young, but this is a time when US EPA Region 8 notified the Cheyenne River Sioux tribal leadership that there was mercury contamination to the drinking water source, the only public water source for the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And they walked away from this problem which ignited a lot of interest in the tribe who to collaborate with, because the federal mandate of US EPA at that time did not allow any health effect investigation or understanding how long-term exposures through drinking water source of mercury can affect people's life. And we were investigated or interviewed by the tribal leadership and were selected to support the tribal work in around 2000. And I've been involved closely from the research after I arrived to the United States 2004, when we know that also mercury exposure in the community was potentially linked with autoimmune disease development, which is also confirmed by several animal and also toxicological studies. And that's something that the tribal leadership and also Indian health service providers were very concerned about. We also, when we started working on these issues and developing surveys to understand community exposures during those times, August 2011, we also were faced with the fact that environmental arsenic contamination in the sediment along the river here were identified by the Tribal Department of Environment and Natural Resources. That time, Carla Dushno leadership was significant in this to identify these sites, and we also understood that therefore the tribal water contamination is potentially even larger than we thought. So here is the map also identifying the areas that we sampled, and they were identified as very high with arsenic exposure. These are significant culturally relevant sites, and we are not discussing those, and they function here. Rather, I want to emphasize that these are also along the river, and especially when the Missouri breaks, choke cherry collection, other fruits collection, plum, and also potentially turnip and other important traditional food items are collected in the areas. So that sparked a lot of interest on how we could make sure that people are eating safe levels, as well as significantly tribal activities are not disturbed because of these exposures. So you can ask the question like, how is this really relevant, and how things from 1986 identified being still important and significant nowadays. The reason for that is because the contamination that coming as mercury form is actually reflects a very large gold and silver mining facilities, more than 900 mines that is started in the 1800s. So these exposures been over 139 years for sure. And actually, President Lincoln opened one of the silver mines, the first one in the Black Hills, in order to finance the Civil War. So the process itself, when the ore is explored, induces water-soluble mercury in this amalgamation process. So that's the way how you separate from the particles at the mercury and together with that with silver and gold, and then that mixture is heated up that allows the total separation and evaporation of mercury. So that phase, that gas phase, then it's also introduced as water-soluble waste to the river, and that's coming from the Black Hills area. And an extent of this is also because the ore itself also contains other metals. I added here also grants that we obtained to understand these exposures, as well as the type of fish that we are very interested in to also investigate. And we also just summarizing these slides, the ways that many of these chemical and metal toxicants are important in the tribal land, as well as introducing the new microplastic and also emerging chemical exposure due to trash burning, and the ways that these potential exposure, both from air, the livestock consumption, and water, affects the human health. In this next slide, I wanted to show that through the tribal game and fish, and thank you for Mr. Randolph runs after so here supporting us, and we built together a tribally really important relevant fish survey in 2014, and we also used that earlier enrollment as well as a follow-up sampling in 2021 during the pandemic, where we investigated how the fish consumption allows us to really capture the appropriate type of fish that potentially brings exposures to people. As the previous work confirmed that fish fillet, a part of the fish, is definitely the source of mercury. So the repeated measures show that the catfish consumption stays significant, as well as walleye, one of the best fish in our area to be consumed. We also see that fish consumption across the year, these are the months that people identified they were fishing the most, and repeated measures also confirm this, as well as we identified 11% of our study participants and 222 people were also fishing, ice fishing during the winter. So the exposures are potentially year-long and stable. So that's part also creating the safety guidance. And here I provide you the guidance materials. I bought it when Ray reminded me to bring this to the community again. And there are ways to create these safety guidances. For example, fridge magnets, so people can see them in their household when they are eating or cleaning the fish after bringing it home. I also wanted to emphasize that we did all these research collaborations with Missouri Breaks and the tribal input. That's incredibly important, not just to be successful and capture the exposure among the community, but also how we process the samples. We had a laboratory space here, as well as Missouri Breaks being incredibly important for us and for my research to provide the diagnostic information also from Indian Health Service. We know also chronic diseases that people experience who also been consuming fish and fishing folks. I also emphasize here that my laboratory experimentation always focus on to provide these questions and answers to these questions, as well as to understand, for example, how these metal exposure relate to and compare to other communities' exposure. So here I'm showing first graph biomonitoring data, the middle of this line is a medium level for everybody else, comparable level of the urinary mercury in other communities across the United States. These are done with the National Health and Nutritional Examination Survey. It's a large project with CDC input since 1959 that rotates communities, but never ever measures tribal participants. So our data here shows a much higher exposure both for males and females. I also like to separate the gender to understand exposure and differences, similarities as well. So we see that these exposures exist higher in the community members. I want to also point toward the right and the mercury, besides of mercury exposure, the cadmium exposure also being high and increased in the community. And we also find not so much, but increased arsenic exposure that potentially coming from the environment. Here I'm showing more metal information data because I had a pilot grant that from National Institute of Health that allowed me to investigate metabolomics profile also in tribal members who fish, and the groups are here 1, 2, 3 report or indicate low, medium, and high consumption of the fish among the participants, and you can see several of the metals, even tungsten, molybdenum, as well as platinum increase as people consume more fish, and the exception of that is uranium. So I wanted to emphasize that many ways we identified and confirmed that this is a potential to have exposure, and the safety guidance are therefore very important. We do not say do not eat fish. This is also a very important fish, very important protein source. It's very healthy to consume fish. Therefore, and as well as this Lakota ways of life. So we understand that its importance culturally as well as for health are much higher than to just say do not eat this. And we understand the safety guidance are much more important, and we provide more education on that in the future too. We intended to continue on that. These slides, I just wanted to show also a round of sense next to me in Chinle, and we were at the gathering for all of our tribal partners as part of the P50, UNM P50 Research, Environmental Health Research Excellence Center. Both phases we have been supported for over 10 years now. And my research and focusing on the metal exposures through the fishing and mine waste exposure being a significant portion of this research work. We also expanded through the P50, as we mentioned earlier, the trash burning exposures. And here I'm presenting the metal relevance of that. And thank you, Teddy, for presenting of the other chemical exposure related to wearing the wristbands. I wanted to emphasize here that comparison here in the graph is the fishing folks, as I mentioned earlier, both males and females now here together, and we can see that lead exposure among those who burned the trash, you donated us urine, higher, as well as urinary arsenic exposures were also increased. But and it's really significant and striking was to us to see that urinary cadmium levels are incredibly high. And when I investigated a potential source of that, is these black, cheaper trash bags contain cadmium as an additive during the plasticizing manufacturing production process. And I'm not singling out here the company here, I just put there as a picture, but all of the cheap and available trash bags potentially bring us cadmium exposure while they burn. So next part of this work, then I wanted to emphasize that now we had information through water and fish exposure to the metals, but we were also looking into how we can characterize air-related exposures to these toxic metals. And then in that work, we are very blessed to work with KEA Foundation and by you, and Dr. Thurston is here. US EPA supported our work as a community air pollution study. Jaylin Farley and the CARE Foundation doing a wonderful, excellent job, as well as we are supported with hard work and dedication by Eva Fielder, who is also student here in the Oglala Lakota College at the Eagle Butte location. We use purple air monitors to characterize these exposures, and the particulate matter is both a larger and a smaller size can be detected. And here is a comparison picture of how small these particles actually, and that's why they have a long effect. And now I give it to Dr. Thurston to talk about our 1 year of measurement data.
Hello, my name is George Thurston. I'm a professor at the New York University School of Medicine, where I do research on the human health effects of air pollution, and especially particles in the air. In this slide, we see a record of data collected here in the Cheyenne River Reservation area, as well as and nearby cities. You can see that we have listed data that's color-coded to the south of Eagle Butte on a farm, then one site at Spruce Street in Eagle Butte, and then another site, Timber Lake, to the north of Eagle Butte. And for comparison, we've included data that were similarly collected for fine particulate matter on a daily basis in Bismarck, North Dakota, as well as in Sioux Falls, and that one's marked as M&M North of 40B, and in this plot. And what you see is, looking at the daily record, that the levels really jump on days when there are wildfires over that summer of 2024. And that many of the sites move similarly. So the levels are not really that different in terms of total fine particulate matter air pollution that's measured here using the purple air samplers. But if you look at the next slide, which has pie charts for the Bismarck site, the Sioux Falls site, and then for the three Cheyenne River area sites, you see that the makeup of the particles are somewhat different in that the top two from the cities have a much bigger percentage of the particle mass that's as sulfur, which makes sense because sulfur comes primarily in the air from burning fossil fuels like diesel, trucks, cars, power plants, and other fossil fuel burning facilities and that emit pollution into the air. Whereas in contrast, when we look at the Cheyenne River sampling sites, they all have relatively high soil particle levels because you see silicon, which is part of sand in the green, has a much bigger piece of the pie, as it were, of all the elements in the samples that we collected on particle filters. So there we collected the particles physically and then took them and analyzed them using X-ray fluorescence. So you see that as I say, the silicon, the green pieces of pie are much higher, and also the calcium, the blue sections of the pie are larger in all three of these sites. Again, that's calcium carbonate, which comes from basically ground up rocks and in the soil. So we see a much more of an agricultural kind of pollution, particle pollution in the reservation as opposed to the urban cities sites where it's much more from fossil fuel combustion as a percentage of the pollution. So that's really the results that we found from our sampling so far. The samples, the purple air samplers will stay after we're gone. Also, after we finish this study, which is going to run another year, and we'll get a full characterization from that. But then those sites will keep running, as well as we also have weather sites that we put in, which actually helps provide more capacity and input into the actual weather forecasting for the reservation area. Places like the Weather Channel take these data and use them to help improve their local forecasts. So the hope is that we'll learn about the pollution levels here, and then we'll also leave at the end of the study that we have here funded by the EPA capacity to keep tabs on the pollution levels in the reservation area.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, George. And here I just wanted to also show that measuring directly mercury from the air is also possible. And thank you, Dr. Thurston, for suggesting Techron as a company in Ottawa, Canada. They are measuring for us passive, so the air just blows into or gets into this device here. It's called the MARPASS, Mercury Passive Monitor, and we received the measurements for that. We have 3 sites, as been mentioned earlier, and we see a little bit more variability in these measurements in the Timberlake area, but there's also detectable levels of mercury comparison to, for example, in Salt Lake City area are found in the air. So this also concludes for us understanding of the pathways are potentially wide-ranging on the reservation, and exposure to these metals are potentially significant and continuously ongoing long term. So we also carried out comparison, for example, an investigation of selenium effect in the body, especially for cognitive health. This portion of the presentation would have been for Dr. Lyle Bass, who fallen ill, so he couldn't be here today. But our team is very large, and Dr. Williams from Cornell University is an MD PhD student. He is also native tribal member from the East Coast, and he is very interested in also neurological effect of various toxic metals. And we had a lot of collaborative effort to identify also not just physiological changes by measuring MRI of the brain, but also understanding through survey information how people in the Strong Heart study, Native Americans' cognitive functioning changes or altered during the lifetime. So selenium is being an interesting metal. You could ask, like, why is it important? I'm very interested in selenium because mercury exposure actually shown to increase selenium in the serum, as well as expansion of this next excretion almost from the cells. So molecular processes induce more selenoproteins, selenium and proteins together, that they shown to be oxidative damage fighters. So they can help to decrease oxidative damage through metal exposure in the body. And because selenium, and that's everything, those makes the poison, that's very important toxicological axiom. We know that small levels of selenium is really appropriate for our body. We don't need a lot, but both deficiency and toxicity can occur in the body. So in the Strong Heart study, and here is a paper that we successfully published, we investigated from the stroke sub-study of the Strong Heart study 728 tribal members, and they were older in age. We also find that increased urine selenium concentration were also linked with increased signs of brain atrophy, especially in the cortex, so the cortical region of the brain. But these effects were not so strong, because when we adjusted for socio-demographic or other cardiovascular risk factors, these were not really present. So increased urine selenium levels were also shown decreased cognitive functioning based on the survey information. So that's something that is very important, because potentially, as I mentioned, selenium is almost like a beacon of having other metal exposures in the body. And then showing this very important neurological, especially cognitive functioning association brings a lot of interest for this. And nowadays, dementia research being it's very important work, and we are thankful that Strong Heart Study also supports such and examinations. So Pilayama for everybody participating in our study, and wonderful have from everyone in Missouri based, and greatly appreciated also the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you so much.